My clan has been chosen to go amongst the sunlit, to reign in the pockets of their young, to dwell in the hearts and minds as they sit herded in their temples and schoolhouses. Our gospel, a fungus in their world.
The thing lurched at her with the buzzsaw. Its decayed ribs were cracked and hanging open like splinters of rotting wood. Its entrails, moist and pink but in the process of turning mushy and brown, sagging and cascading from the ruptured cavity that used to be its stomach. Its gangrenous skin smelled like moldy, month-old meat. In fact, it was moldy in some spots. It had a putrescent sheen hanging off of its porous, filth-encrusted skeleton in patches, stretched thin in some spots like blasted, moth-eaten leather, the muscles beneath settling like clotted lumps of foul clay. It was alive with moss and fungus. Mushrooms blossomed here and there like it had laid in the mud of the damp forest for untold months. A walking ecosystem. Worms of all shapes and sizes had been nestled in its every orifice, and now the thing was standing upright. They simply poured from it. They hit the ground with a thick, pittering slap as if someone were pouring a huge pot of wet macaroni onto the floor. A liquid giggle erupted from its skull-like face, its rictus sheen stretching into a twisted grin. It leered at her, revealing a mouth full of yellowed teeth, seeming huge as its gums receded. A pitched wheezing escaped from the hollow of its nasal cavity. Grub slid through the fluid and collected there, white leeches squirming in a stagnant pond. Its eyes, like peeled grapes, seemed to sparkle as it closed in on its prey. Watering and draining pus, they caught the light, gleaming all the more. The dead thing raised the buzzsaw and limped slowly towards the cornered girl, savoring every ounce of fear that it inflicted upon her. The creature shuddered, grew excited at the sight of her twisted, mutilated ankle. The rusted bear traps, which it had sown in the undergrowth just beneath the house, had reaped greatly for it. Its bile-soaked giggle rising to a choked, squalling pitch. It inched closer to her, holding the buzzsaw aligned to the girl's face. She screamed helplessly, able to do nothing else save vomit from the smell and wet herself from the fear, all of which she did quite uncontrollably. Poetry in motion. The thing paused a moment, waiting. "Please, don't hurt me!" This was cue to bring the warring saw down into her face. The pleading, the begging, the running, the sobbing, it was all over. All that was left, the pure carnage unleashed by the saw. Blood sprayed upon the dead thing's face like a fountain, showering it with chunks of chipped skull, shredded skin, bits of pulped brain matter, and a stray eyeball. This is why I'm not getting more drunk before I finish the stories. Ceasing the mayhem for a moment, the creature bent down to pick the eyeball off the blood-slick floor. He licked at its blue iris, and then crushed it, gulping down the destroyed remains like a chocolate-covered cherry. The private act of carnage complete, its butchery spent, the creature turned around to face an enormous hole in the dilapidated second-story wall. The night was still. Stars filled the crisp, clear sky. The piney woods lay silent. The creature took it in, imagining the cities, the people beyond, the quiet that would soon be gone. A light wind picked up, seemingly out of nowhere, and a sound, an unnatural sound, a rustling on the breeze that only a creature such as itself could grasp the enormity, the depth of. It was a sound that signaled the coming of something unimaginably obscene, perversion of every good thing, of every living thing in unviolated flesh, as the bloodshed had summoned something that embodied it. A dark and quiet shape floated down through the clouds, through the old wooden house. The dead thing knew what it was. To anything alive, the shape hovering towards the ragged window would have been overwhelming in its horror. But to the buzzsaw-wielding abomination standing in the blood of the young girl, it was nothing short of God. Drifting closer, arms outstretched in an almost crucified pose, was a man, or rather, an obscene parody of a man, skinned like a farm animal, with the exception of his hands, feet, and head. His soft, pale face bore the gentle beauty of a drowned angel, his lips so purple they were virtually black, and hollow, sunken eyes. A tangled bramble of jet-black hair jutted and spiked from the top of his head, stiff, reminding one of the quills of some savage animal. A tangled bramble of jet-black hair jutted and spiked from the top of his head, stiff, reminding one of the quills of some savage animal. He wore a fine pinkish-white suit and was nude all at once, The suit made from the man's own skin, sliced and pulled off and sewn together to form a man's own design. Removed, rejected, reformed, and worn like a badge of honor, of control, inversion, purpose. A symbol of something no thing with a soul could ever understand nor wish to. At his waist hung a tool belt, overflowing with every tool, saw, blade, plier, every sharp, blunt, or prying object imaginable, and several that were not, all bearing the telltale signs of their role in countless bloodlettings, so many that they would never dry. Just below the tool belt, the man's coat hung unbuttoned, and a knot of entrails hung down into the mouth of a meat grinder affixed to his crotch, a meat grinder that seemed to serve no purpose other than to grind those entrails into a thick pulp that dangled from the spout beneath, glistening. Flapping in the breeze, the rustling that announced his presence was an immense flowing cape made of stitched-together human faces, stitched-together hand writhing, still alive, and sewn directly into the divine obscenity's back. His hands lay open as if to embrace. Around the wrists were hundreds of knives, skewers, wires, prods, spring-loaded to snap forward, a motorized slaughterhouse at each soft hand's disposal, eager to swallow those hands' softness and the tenderness they promised like hungry metal mouths. He floated in, his black leather engineer boots making a soft clap as his feet finally touched the rotted wooden floor. As the saw-wielding carcass was just about to approach the object of its adoration, the man came to it and threw aside his face cape, which was draped around him, crawling softly with unlife. He pulled open his skin coat and reached inside the soft muscle of his abdomen. He pulled out his small intestine, bloated and jaundiced. He stared at the abomination, silent. A look of realization washed over the corpse's face, and it gasped in disbelief. The abomination dropped its saw with a crash, then held out its hand. The man placed his sour intestine in the creature's palm, a sign of favor. The creature ecstatically caressed the entrail, cooing and drooling over the honor, its moist hands trembling. The man looked down at the woman at its feet, the splashes of blood in their patterns, the humanity shredded like confetti and strewn about like an art gallery. And that's exactly what it was. That's what everything was about to be. He knelt down and felt the cooling blood of the young woman at his fingertips. The creature understood. The man's pride was not ill-spent. He stood, took a step towards the trembling abomination, and smiled. Thousands of ivory stick-pin teeth hinted at behind softly parted lips. He reached out and put a hand on the thing's face, smearing a trail of blood down its bony cheek. He spoke to the creature without speaking. Mercy is a gift to us. Without it, we could never savor its denial. And so sweet it will be. The abomination would have cried if it could. The two figures turned to the broken-down wall, looking out at the barrens that stretched before them. Neither made a sound, but both thought the same thing. Beyond the trees, beyond the wilderness, the cities, teeming with people, life. Another quiet breeze broke the silence, whispering through the old house, and three lifeless shapes within it. So sweet indeed. And this one's called A Popular Campfire Story by Emmett Kiernan, also known as Val. Blood of the killer, hair of the betrayer, and flesh of the unwanted, so went the final spell of the witch in the wood. You may have heard her name before. Perhaps you caught it from the hushed conversations the adults sometimes have when they think there are no kids listening. Perhaps you've heard talk of something in the woods near your home, or talk of that old story. Do you want to know why they call her the witch in the wood? I'll give you a hint. It's not because she lived in these woods, although that much is true. A long time ago, before the persecution of witches and the horrors of biblical tyranny, every town had a witch. Our town's witch was quite proficient with potions, which she would make out of the bark of trees and the special plants of the forest. It was her and her alone who knew the ingredients, channeling them through unearthly means. When a plague or famine, or even just a nasty case of hay fever ever hit the town, the cure always lay in that wooden shack out there in the woods. The witch never asked for much. Some fine wine, some sugar, a live goat, or some amorous attention, perhaps. So it is a shame that with all the good things in the world, it It was human stupidity that would bring the end of a harmonious witchery to an abrupt and violent end. It was on a summer's day, like the one just past, when everything fell apart. This fall from grace began, at least in the context of our little town, on a small farm. A husband had been left alone with his newborn baby, his wife having gone out for the day. He was out building a shed, his young child lying out on the grass nearby to him when a scented wind drove his blood to boil. He looked up from his work to see, clad in all white and striding with the breeze, his wife's comely young sister. A summer lust came upon them, and they rushed inside, mad from it, to consummate their illicit affair, as they did often. The wife returned from her sojourn to find the two lovers lying together, but that her only child had been left out in the sun. In the harsh light of day, the vulnerable babe had dehydrated and died. Grief-stricken and unable to scream, the good wife ran deep into the woods. Before long, she came upon the witch's wooden shack, where she was welcomed in with open arms. The witch knew of the good woman's plight. More of the good woman even knew herself. That good and faithful wife was offered a fix, a spell to bring her baby back from its earthly grave. The ingredients were few and simple. Fresh blood drawn from the husband who had killed her child through his sheer negligence. A lock of his hair shaved from the head of the sister that betrayed her. Finally, to complete the ritual of resurrection, the living body of an unwanted child for her baby's soul to return into. The witch assured her that once the ritual was complete, the baby would even transform to look just like the one who had died. Grief-stricken as she was, however, the thought of taking another child's life was too far a step to take. It was then the witch softly whispered in the good woman's ear. She revealed to her the truth, that her sister's own young child had been conceived from an earlier adultery with her husband. The woman's vengeance was swift and terrible. She emerged from the woods at the time when the night is at its darkest, bearing a sickle that the witch had gifted her. The husband had no time to make a sound before she opened his throat, the blade sliding through flesh and bone as if white-hot. Blinded with fury, she carved up his face like a jack-o'-lantern. She collected his blood in a milk pail before moving on. Surely enough, the good wife found her sister sleeping soundly in her own marriage bed. How easily forgotten a woman can be, having vanished into the woods. She initially intended to pull out her sister's hair violently at the root. Now that she was in possession of her new blade, however, which could deconstruct a human being so effortlessly, she opted to simply remove her sister's head. Simple, painless, and efficient. Her grim work completed, the woman drifted into town, silent as a ghost, cloaked by witchcraft in the night. She snatched her sister's sleeping baby from its crib without stirring it or waking her sister's own idiot husband. The woman made her way back through the woods in a supernaturally short time. Every path was shorter than it should have been, the fireflies guiding her. She softly cradled the sleeping baby in one arm. In the other hand, she had a sloshing bucket which spilled over the brim with long blonde hair. The witch began at once the ritual. She boiled the hair and blood together in her cauldron along with her own reeking concoction, which was brewed from bog filth. As the stench hit the nostrils of the baby, it finally began to stir. Finding itself in unfamiliar surroundings and ensconced in a demonic stench, the child screamed. The piercing shriek of the baby snapped the good and the faithful wife out of her dark and deep destructive fugue, and she reeled with the horror of what was transpiring. The witch urged her to remain calm, but they had gone too far to turn back, but the good woman refused to let another child die. She held the child tight to her breast and ran back towards town. Oh my god, this is why I'm not going to drink more. She found her front door hanging open, and the lamplight shone from inside. Dark figures moved within, and voices could be heard. There was sobbing, quiet gibbering, and what sounded like multiple arguments happening all at once. Within her house, a large group of townsfolk had gathered, huddled around something on the dining table. The good woman could not see the thing that they were gathered around, though she assumed it to be one of the cadavers she had left in her wake. If that were the case, she was ready to face justice for her crimes. As she entered, the people turned to face her. She immediately saw from their pale and sunken faces that they had seen something that had shaken them to their core and stripped them of their sanity. Hair drawn to the cries, the carpenter croaked. "It woke the whole town," whines the mayor's wife. "It wouldn't stop. We couldn't make it stop," several townspeople attested. "Explain this!" shrieked the mayor. The crown parted. It was sitting bolt upright. Its thin, desiccated limbs were twisted, and its skull was fractured, the head misshapen. Its throat, wrists, and belly were lacerated, tiny organs spilled out on the table like small, desiccated fruit. It was silent, for they had sewn its tiny mouth shut to stop its terrible wailing. "It refuses to die," the town butcher actually giggled. And the eyes, milky white and full of hatred, locked onto the woman's own gaze. It had once had a baby. All the potential in the world, a lifetime stretching out in front of it. But now she had robbed it even of the sweetness of the grave. "Explain this!" The woman's breath caught in her throat. Her vision began to dim, her heart beating fast, too fast. She felt her knees buckle. It was too much, all too much to bear. The creature on the table watched her as she fell, and with her last breath she uttered one single word. "Witch!" This was all the townspeople needed to know. They had been almost too afraid to come to the conclusion themselves. The most powerful creature in their community, the healer of disease, manipulator of reality, had turned against them. The witch, that blasted witch. And so they swaddled that hideous child in black cloth and stowed it away to a wicker basket. They took to the carpenter's workshop and allowed their madness to dictate the construction of an infernal device, the perfect tool with which to execute their vengeance. The procession trekked through the woods like an infernal circus, the path opening gladly before them. They were too lost in the ecstasy of their fury to realize this was the path that all men and women in their wake were about to follow. The witch came silently from her shack, a mysterious smile on her face as if she had been expecting them. They showed her the child, and she picked it up. She cooed at it, hugged it, and with a wave of her finger undid the threads that bound its jaws. The townsfolk flinched, but the hideous child only laughed softly. She went without protest into their infernal device, an anthropomorphic prison, a suit made of solid wood, built to fully contain the witch. They shoved the child in there with her too. The lower belly of the suit expanded to fit the hideous thing. The execution suit bore an iron funnel atop its head like a crown. It took 5 people to lift the witch's bubbling cauldron from its flame, and another 3 to pour the boiling liquid down, sloppily through the funnel. They boiled the witch alive in her own potions. Those who held the suit upright as the boiling liquid splashed and split out from the sides of the funnel had much of their own skin burnt away. They were too far gone in ecstatic madness to even feel the pain. To make sure the deed was done, they moved the execution suit inside the shack and burned it to the ground. After staying long enough to make sure that no life was left on the site, they seeded the earth with salt. So ended the age of witches, with similar stories playing out in every town, every place all over the world. Which kind was burnt off the face of the earth with surgical precision. The only thing that remains of that time is this story, and the very dangerous information contained within. For this is no normal tale of madness and murder. This contains the very last shred of the witch's true magic, the one true resurrection spell. Blood of the killer, hair of the betrayer, and flesh of the unwanted. This is all needed for a woman to come calling through the woods once again. This is all is needed for her to sing back into the world the fruit, so cruelly plucked before its time of ripening. So this story is called The Outer Voice. April 2nd, 2016. I need an outlet before I crack. I wish someone was listening. They're not, so I'm writing a journal to keep it here in the duets. Protocol can go to hell. It's only a few feet down anyway. Every day I scramble through these shafts like a tunnel rat, regretting my choice to enlist as a mechanic. Regretting more the choice to take the very private invite to work here, all the way in Hadal Zone inside a top-secret deep-sea facility. The idea of a real-life sea lab sounded amazing. I was expecting something much more high-tech, but this creaking Cold War monstrosity celebrated its 50th anniversary last week. I somehow landed the most boring and terrifying job at once by coming here. I watched these dark iron catacombs warp when I looked into the vanishing point, and every instinct in me overrides my engineer's education to scream, "It'll crack and let in a jet of water that will cut it through the shaft" at me. Something that would create a domino effect and implode the whole station. The warp is slight, but ever-present, apparently a design feature to do with radar camouflage, but something I avert my eyes from all the same, lest I break out into an ice-cold sweat. Not that it's in my sense of sight that scares me the most. The rest of the crew don't notice. They get to stay in well-lit areas designed for walking upright all day. I spend as much time there as I can. After a while, looking out of the observation windows and seeing anglertooth and squidsucker ready to rend flesh and blood loses its charm. The visible monsters, after they emerge from the abyss, cease to scare. Some of the crew, particularly the zoologists and biologists, even think they're cute. They gather outside the windows, attracted to the light. Light that isn't visible from the surface due to how far down we are. Only the abyssal beasties have eyes to see us with affinity. The surface world has no idea we're down here. Most deep-sea fish are apparently blind, some of which don't have eyes to begin with. With no surface to touch, they rely on scent and sound to navigate. Here in the marrow of this creaking skeleton, it's the sound that penetrates where the walls are the thinnest. I think of the poor bastards in the Byford dolphin incident, and the idea of a sudden death of an implosive compression does not comfort me on my shifts. They're slower death, but my situation is like having a loaded cannon to my head day in and day out. The very ecosystem of the abyss could tear me to shreds, much worse than any anglerfish, six-gill shark, or colossal squid. Every day, the creaking of the hull and the rush of water resonate through the pipes, but it is what I hear beyond that's twisting me into a nightmare-addled wreck. Ignoring it is becoming increasingly impossible. I don't have it as bad as the submersible pilots, though. At best, they're off-kilter. At worst, they're outright disturbing to be around. There is something about the blackness of the abyss that can't be felt in the void of space. Something that speaks. We're psychologically screened, same as astronauts, but because we're kept in secret, we don't receive the love and adoration of the starmen. Hellward bound rather than skyward sent, it suited the needs of the government better to have our competition with the Soviets kept as subtle as possible, and has stayed that way since. Starmen are heroes, so when they come back, they get all the aftercare they can handle, and maybe a couple of book deals while they're at it. Us? We're treated the same as grunts, cycled in and out of the front line from what's supposed to be a sense of care, though it feels more like a begrudged formality. There's no voluntary retirement either, and unless I was in good graces with the higher-ups, I'd be suicided along my dishonorable discharge, just like the rest of the crew. Either that, or I end up in a mental hospital somewhere, on a special military-approved drip feed. It's something like that that rattles you if you think on it too much like I'm doing now. That kind of thinking will drive any serviceman over the edge. Still, what I see in the submersible pilots is not the jittery PTSD I've seen in Army infantry. Neither it is the morose malaise of a grounded space boys, or even the infinite stare of prisoners loose from solitary confinement. It's something else. They come back from the decompression chamber after an hour or two of drifting around with the marine snow, and there's a thick smog about them. They're what I imagine monks to be like. Blissful, but not in any way a rational person would desire. Not the type of bullshit office place mindfulness you get in those tiny Mother's Day books. These guys hear something out there. Something we can't hear back in mission control on the speakers, or see at a passing glance from viewing windows. When the tether is cut and they're out there, they're in the abyss, left to its whim like all the glowing, needle-fanged fish that float with them. It speaks to them, and they come back enlightened, inhuman. There's a pull deep in their eyes, omnipresent and forever black, even in the artificial light of the decompression chamber. The abyss itself, not any single biological creature swimming in it, whispers a lost language in their ears, reminding them that they are at its indifferent mercy, and a horrible sense of acceptance settles in. I'm writing this because I've started to hear it too, loudest at the weak points of the hull. I need to talk to the pilots. I don't want to. I'm shaking at the thought, and if I could leave the pit alive I would, but not at the cost of my mind. The longer I leave it, the thinner my sun-deprived grasp on reality becomes. Writing this is helpful somewhat, and now that my thoughts are more organized, I know that the only thing I can do is talk to the pilots. I see myself in them. April 9th, 2016. Am I losing it? I must be. Over the past week, I've gotten closer to the pilots. It sounds so ridiculous when I write it, like talking to another member of the crew should be a task at all, but I'm always reminded of how cliquey any sort of organization is. Here, on a work-related level, it's unusually in your best interest to not ask too many questions. At first, the pilots hit me with a different kind of need to know. For the less weird ones, it was the usual cold shoulder for people outside their department, keeping you at a comfortable distance. For the fully weird ones, the ones who spend the most time out in their subs, it's more like how strangers are treated in foreign lands. Some terrible but beloved ruler is watching, waiting for you to let the outsider know something he shouldn't. More often than not, when I started asking probing questions about what it felt like to be out there, exposed, they would try to steer the conversation off course or just make an excuse to do something else. It wasn't until I told them about myself, but what I'd heard, that they really paid attention. I told them how the abyss itself seems alive. Not the same way documentaries say the Great Barrier Reef is, or was, alive. Not the same way documentaries... Oh, sorry. We're a thriving ecosystem full of colorful fish and coral throw it in your face. The underworld engines and pump down here that crush and squeeze, that blacken the sun, that spawn blind monsters that barely classify as life, that whip marine snow when it's not caking onto the sunken bleached husk of whales, moving at the dictation of something. I told them I heard its faint guttural whisper in its unearthly dialect, only fragments of its high-end cadence pressing against the hull and into my ears. I told them that it was casting nightmares onto my brain, darkening it to black matter. I told them that inky swirls of detritus outside of every light-spotted window in its ephemeral system of writing, but that the audible spoken word was the most frightening and stomach-churning. And they listened. They knew, and I knew. Part of me hoped they would surprise me and treat me like I was crazy, maybe have reported and sent upwards to land, even if it meant being locked up somewhere else. I wanted to stay out of their clique, but now that I think on it, there are no islands the sea does not eventually swallow. They spoke of the abyss in the same way. Language would eventually fail us all. We discovered we were kindred spirits, simply aware of something that engulfs the rest of the unhearing crew, too. None of us were for the better because of it. It felt necessary. This must be what it's like to hear the news that you have cancer, but then finding out everyone else has cancer, too. Do you tell them? Do you spread the word? Do you try to help the rest? They decided that I needed to be helped first, so to speak. Tomorrow they would take me out on one of their submersibles. It is impossible for them to simply explain what they hear too, or to appreciate the source of the abyssal voice without seeing its mouth, or to understand how it squeezes us without seeing its gripping hands. As an engineer, I know that it's simply pressure at a colossal scale and shifting currents. As a human with a psychology or a soul, I feel it is something else. Call it a god or a demon seems too simplistic. There are too many fields of science beyond mechanical physics that I don't understand, but I recognize science in general can only answer the question of how. The question of why is something only unquantifiable human experience can scratch. So I must allow curiosity to take over. The rest of the crew can bury their heads in scientific discovery, but I can't. I want to. By God, do I want to. I am ridden with terror that fires along each nerve with the lash of a whip. My only hope to soothe it, or at least learn to live with it, is to take the dive. April 11th, 2016. God, I wish I'd never gotten that submersible. I wish I should have stayed away from the decompression chamber. Should have just kept my head down. Should have listened. I boarded with 2 of the pilots. They gave me a separate scuba tank and a mouthpiece, knowing I would hyperventilate. We set out in what we were told the control room was a research mission, taking measurements of pressure fluctuation, temperature, sediment content in the marine snow, etc. I wasn't on the roster. The front end of the submersible was a thick glass sphere coated in a sort of tiny ceramic net, same as the observation windows in the base. Focus past the net and it's essentially invisible, but stronger than steel. With the headlights on, everything was a sickly green, marine snow drifting around and past the sub, spiraling into vortices when it wanted to persist. The sporadic snow-white squid would slip past, often furiously followed by a fangtooth, both returning to the darkness they had spawned from. The headlights are designed to view solid surfaces. In the open water, they're limiting, creating a contrast that binds in pace as formless as this. Then, as per the crew's instructions and after we finished our official task, blocked off by co-conspirators back at base, I climbed behind the dashboard and sat as centered in the viewing sphere as I could. I looked through the dark glass, anxiety tearing through my stomach, knowing what was to come next. They switched the internal lights and non-essential displays off, then killed the headlights. For a moment, there was complete and utter darkness. No sunlight, no artificial light, nothing. I started to breathe heavy gulps of the oxygen tank. They told me to relax for what it was worth. I felt as if I was in the open mouth of a great monster. My eyes adjusted and slowly, like the stars above, one blue flash after the other started to register. A pulse here, a pulse there, almost all of which were blue. Bioluminescent fish and squid. No one spoke, just watched. There seemed to be a pattern, another voice of the abyss speaking through its cherubs. I regained control of my breathing and was gaining a sense of bliss for a moment. It felt like I was beginning to understand, or rather recognize the voice. Its orator was trying to bring itself to my level. The second that thought crossed my mind, the subaquatic stars were snuffed out, and I found myself in a black reality again. I froze, and all barriers between me and the abyss slowly vanished. Unable to do so much as to see my hands in front of my face, I quickly lost all sense of space. Time had already left us long before getting into the sub. I heard the jets die down and all sense of motion faded with them. The pilots, who I had forgotten about completely by then, were silent. There, without a bottom and top in a great new darkness, I had nothing to hold on to. No panic, no ground, no light, no sound. Until, after an immeasurable passage of time, the voice began to speak again. Dread gathered in my core, balling up faster and faster with every syllable. The highest end of its register was bassy and slow, and its language was not one of mammal or fish or invertebrate. I had become part of the abyss, finally able to understand the voice of whatever spoke through it. Through me. I resonated with this force, too paralyzed to ask questions. I understood what the sub-pilots understood, knowing now why they had such a grim air about them. It set me a task, and I must complete it with the aid of the sub-pilots. It almost welcomed my arrival, telling me the hard truth I needed to know. I am the abyss. I am another of its tendrils. What it must do through me. This thing that spoke to me is not merely a mass of black water, but something beyond even that. It has its own nature, and we humans are a small blockade to its progress, the most separate from which we fool ourselves to be. When the lights were turned back on, I remembered who I was. The body of the maintenance engineer. There was dread in my stomach, and terror returned like lightning. The pilots were shaken too. We returned back to base, and I spent the next night in tears. I miss who I was. I should have surfaced, even if it meant death. I should have buried my head like the rest of the crew. No, I shouldn't have. That would simply be a distraction from the inevitable. It wants the rest of the crew to hear it. It knows where the walls are thinnest on the hull, where a crashing submersible would create a cutting jet of water and cause a domino effect. We simply have to let it in and listen. Yeah! That was a very cool Lovecraftian tale. This one's called Hallway by Robert Keogh. I think that's how you say it. Sorry, Robert. I am not a name scientist. I am a humble meme farmer. LOL! You're in a hallway. It is long, but you think you can see the end of it. The hallway looks normal. It has cream walls that bear the telltale dirt of regular traffic, but is otherwise clean. You stare at the walls, hoping to get a clue to where you are, but instead you fall into a trance-like haze at the sheer blankness of the walls. They remind you of something, but you can't remember what it is. The floor is an egg-shelled color linoleum, the only visible pattern being light speckles of black that could be dirt, but you're not sure. There are scuff marks scattered around the hallway, maybe from someone wearing black-soled shoes. Otherwise, like the walls, the floors look clean. The roof seems to be composed entirely of fluorescent lights. They beam down a harsh, unforgiving light. They remind you of office lighting, but much more intense. Red spots form in your eyes after looking in the lights. You rub your eyes to make the pain go away, but it does not. You look behind you. There is only more bare, blank hallway, but you think you can see the end of it. You have no other ideas, so you start walking further into the hallway. The promise of an end ahead of you propels you forward. Walking becomes monotonous quickly. No matter how far you get, the white walls make it feel like you haven't moved. You speed up, hoping to cover more ground, to get further, to find something. It's not enough. You start a slow jog, the paddling of your shoes against the linoleum making strange screeching noises. Ooh, such a lightweight. You jog faster, breaking into a sprint. The screeching gets more pronounced. It starts to fill your ears. Soon it is all you can think about. The screech is annoying by itself, but the repetition, that is what's beginning to drive you mad. Screech! You stop running. You keep running. Screech! You keep running. Screech! You come to an abrupt halt. The force of your stop almost sends you head over heels and gives you one final annoying screech. The one being the lookout and the most annoying. You try to take a breath and find it difficult. Your lungs burn, spreading battery acid breaths throughout your body. You wonder how long you've been running. You look back the way you came. The place where you started is just more hallway, stretching out as far as you can see. You untie your shoes and take them off. You tie your shoelaces together and wrap the shoes around your neck, making a strange-looking shoe scarf that elicits a laugh from somewhere deep in your unconscious mind. The sound of your laugh echoes down the hallway, coming back to you, sounding strange and distorted. It is a sinister noise. It sends a shiver down your spine. You're not sure why. It is only your laugh, after all. However, it is the first noise you have heard since the screeching stopped. You decide to try an experiment. You hold your breath, listening to the world around you. The only sound you can hear is the soft hum of the lights above you. You strain your ears for any other sound, but the soft thump of your heart is the only thing you can hear. The breath you were holding escapes your mouth. You replenish your lungs, and that's when you notice there is no smell in the hallway. And if it smelled odor on yourself, the clothes you're wearing smell neither freshly washed or recently worn. They have no discernible aroma. The black rubber sole on your shoe doesn't smell like rubber. Maybe it just feels like rubber? But then, should it not have a smell anyway? You put the thought in the back of your mind, start walking again. The floor feels nice on your bare feet, and the padded sound is much less annoying than the screech. In the distance, you see something that thrills you to the core. A wall. One that is not left or right of you, but straight in front of you. Two paths to choose from. A choice. Your first choice. You start running, slipping a little on the linoleum. You run right up to the wall, hugging it with your body. With your back to the wall offering you a strange level of comfort, you find yourself at a T-junction. There is a path to the left and right of you, and one ahead of you, the one you just came from. Both paths seem to be just as long and endless as the one you came from. You sigh and weigh your options. You reach in your pockets to try and find a coin, but they are empty. You look ahead into the hallway you just came from. In the distance, there is a dark figure. You take a moment to focus on it, but your attempts make it blurrier. Why is that? It screams at you. Something you cannot hear, but it sounds alien, frightening. A distorted yell. It could be yelling friendship or death, but you do not know, and not knowing terrifies you. The figure starts moving closer, and you know whatever it is has broken into a run. A familiar screech fills the air between you. For reasons you are ashamed to admit are outright fear, you pull your shoes on and start running down the hallway to your right. The white walls blur on both sides as you run faster and faster, pushed by a deep fear that lies in your heart of the dark figure. Bravery strikes. You look behind you. You see nothing. You slow down, the fear subsides. Maybe you'd not seen anything. Maybe it was just your imagination. You start to wonder what it was that actually frightened you. Maybe it was the screaming. Maybe you just feared someone else. The hallway you were in seems shorter than the previous one. Even though you cannot see where you started from, you can see where your end is. Coming into your view is another corner. You greet this one with less enthusiasm. Again, you are at a T-junction. You lean on the wall again, now needing the rest after the long stretches of running. You try to remember the last time you worked out this hard, but you cannot. Your calves scream at you, only slightly louder than your feet. You wonder if the shoes you're wearing are even your size. They certainly do not feel like they fit right. You consider taking them off, but worry about what would happen if you were to slip and fall. You could break something on this hard ground. You shudder to think about what would happen if you hit one of these walls full force with your head. Taking the hallway to your left, purely so you do not go around in a circle and end up back where you started. You could even remember where you started. When you think about you are halfway down the hallway, you notice something in the distance. A blurry dark figure leaning against the wall. Realizing the absurdity of your earlier fear, you start running and yelling. Something like, "Hello!" or "Wait there!" You're not certain. The screech of your shoes now sounding like a symphony compared to the silence. The figure seems to notice you. Without any acknowledgement, it starts running down a hallway to the left. When you make it to the wall at the end of the hallway, you can no longer see the figure. In your unbridled desire to see another human being, you had even thought about how frightening you must have seemed running and screaming at them. You laugh at your own stupidity and decide to go the opposite way, still not wanting to circle back on yourself. As you stroll through another hallway, you touch your hands off to the wall. It feels smooth and unblemished. It feels surgical. That's when it dawns on you. You don't know where you are. You'd gotten so caught up in finding a way out of where you were, you never stopped to think about where you are. Maybe you just couldn't handle thinking about it. Maybe the only thing keeping you moving was not thinking. You stop. You sink into the ground, you think, possibly for the first time. Once the floodgates are open, there's no closing them, is there? The first question led to the second question. Who am I? The third question is, what do I look like? The fourth is, how long have I been here? You got to ask yourself that fifth and final question on the cold linoleum floor under the harsh fluorescent light in that impossibly white hallway. It ends up forming not a question, but a statement. I am never getting out of here. The sentence infects your brain and falls out of your mouth unconsciously. Oops, sorry. It fills the quiet, sterile air of the hallway and hangs there, haunting you. But it's always been there. From the second you woke up in this hallway, a part of you knew. You say it again, this time out loud. I am never getting out of here. You are never getting out of these hallways. These hallways will see the end of you. So why are you still going? You pick yourself up, though you can't see the end of the hallway. It has to be like all the others, right? It has to end in a wall. You start running, faster than you ever have before. You pump your legs until they're screaming at you to stop, but you don't. You just move faster and faster. The wall comes up on you faster than you thought it would. You force every ounce of energy into your legs to get them to move faster. You lower your head and you hit the wall. You hear a crack and feel your head split open. You feel blood trickle down your face as you fall to the floor slowly. Blood washes over your eyes as they close against your wishes. Your mouth curls into a smile as you are welcomed into the unfathomable darkness. You wake up. Without opening your eyes, you touch your head. It feels shaped. You had done no damage at all. You open your eyes. You are in a hallway. It is long, but you think you can see the end of it. Ooh, purgatory. Mr. DiBartolo took one final look at the instruction manual and decided he was as ready as he was going to be. Every new machine brought butterflies for all it entailed, but by now he'd resigned. It wasn't his first machine, and surely wouldn't be his last, but still. A big job is a big job. Heavy is heavy, no matter how many times you've done it. Okay, positive and negative furies. Mr. DiBartolo opened up his packets of salt, of fresh blood, and of sour ash, white oak, and milk, and sprinkled each in their respective containers. He opened up the packets of effigies, one for each machine, and dropped them in. Alright, let's see. He had to make sure he stuck the display cards in their correct machines. You couldn't very well have the Power Ponies card in the Sickies machine, then screw on the lids tightly and say a few words over each machine. Sometimes he would mess up the words. They weren't always the easiest thing to say. As long as the intent was there and true, it would work. Finally, it was done. He had a brand new 4-slot vending machine ready for duty. Soon, he would be drowning in quarters. Elsewhere. Without any warning at all, the wet sky opened up. The things scurried forward, knowing what was about to come. Blood spilled down onto the pulpy soil, and the things sniffed at it, wanting to touch it, to taste it, to wallow in it. But as greedy as they were, they held back. It was not for all of them. Then an agonizing moment, something else fell from the putrid sky and splashed into the blood. A small figure emerged from the huddled crowd of mewling things and reached to pick it up as though by birthright. It examined the little plastic effigy, and sure enough, it matched his bulbous, knobby head. His squished, exaggerated features, swollen eyes, wide, rictus mouth, shrunken death camp body, entrail bloated abdomen.
"Mine!" the thing screamed. "Mine! It has invited us!"
The other creatures squealed and howled in their jealous disapproval, and slowly backed away from the thickening puddle of cold blood. It was not for them. Not for this time. The small figure skittered through the trash and meat, splashing through the oily green pools and brushing up against the huge, thick mushrooms, on its way to find Mother. It looked like a worm storm might be brewing. The frogs would be out soon. The little figure clutched the tiny plastic effigy tightly to its bony chest and hurried. A loud clang. His foot stumbled into an old dented trash can. Oh, I'm sorry. But my 5-minute timer went off and I didn't I can start again now that I'm back. But yeah, those 5 minutes I was spent eating. Okay. I'll read the rest of the story without the word "the." A loud clang. His foot stubbed into an old dented trash can. Finally, he reached clearing. He walked into a heap of stinking, ripped plastic bag until it grew dense enough to climb. He took a stale, pungent breath. He always did when he ascended the heap. Cradle, throne, Mother was a breathtaking sight. Her head was size of a small house, like some enormous cherub's head gone overripe in the garden. Its endlessly grinning, glassy face stared obliviously at greasy, billowy sky. Its complexion that of a freshly rotten fruit, almost still inviting, but soft, thin in spots, moistening, dirt-smeared. Its hair was like yarn, brunette and pulled up in thick, tangling pigtails. It was brimming with trash, detritus, debris, some moving, some long-stilled. Just underhead, cushioned by mounds of garbage bags, began huge, slick rib cage, color of raw, texture of spoiled meat, and three rows of sagging, tumescent breasts. Spindly, overlong arms sprouted from 2 low shoulders like rancid fallen trees, ending in spidery, cadaverous hands. Flowing from up-tilted ribcage was a giant swollen stomach, nearly as big as Thing's head, cradled in a huge, bony pelvis. Equally cadaverous legs sprouted from sides, perpetually spread-eagled and ending in filthy, disproportionate clown-sized feet. Their hideously long, ragged yellow nails scraped and scribbled idly in the trash.
"Mother, Mother, an offering from above, an invitation from the sunlight."
Mother reached down and plucked a little piece of plastic from quivering hands of her excited spawn and looked it over for a moment. Without saying a word, she opened her mouth, brimming with a blackened rows of reeking picket fence teeth and a long, flat tongue unfurled, licking up little effigy and scooping it into her mouth. She sucked on blood-slick thing like a gummy bear until seemingly satisfied, and finally choked it down her glistening throat with a hollow gulping sound. Knob-headed hobgoblin began to dance, overjoyed. Mother's enormous stomach began to swell and warp, its surface rippling and bulging like a cluster of shuddering blisters. With her big spidery hands, she reached up under edge of pulsating abdomen and lifted. From beneath, a fleshy puddle of sour entrails and dense clusters of brightly colored polyps, like a Crayola caviar, flowed forth. From somewhere within, a thick, pale, translucent light began to emerge. Mother's giant head tilted skywards, its glassy-eyed smile unchanging. Tube extended, pushing through air and into the sulphurous clouds, pushing through them, past them, out of sight. Little creatures turned from Mother to face crowd gathering at the edge of spectacle. "It has been decreed!
My clan has been chosen to go amongst the sunlit, to reign in the pockets of their young, to dwell in the hearts and minds as they sit herded in their temples and schoolhouses. Our gospel, a fungus in their world."
The crowd of things howled, jealous though they might have been. Truly, it was a moment of glory. Mr. Di Bartolo watched as little opening in the bottom of the empty machine began to moisten and fell. Oops, sorry. About damn time. A small pink bubble began to form from it. It grew until it was about the size of a golf ball and slowly began to lose its color. As it did, a little object could be seen floating inside, sloshing in a womb of semi-clear liquid. The bubble hardened. A separation formed towards its top, the edge growing thicker until it became a lip. Cap. Oops, sorry, I did it again. Bubble lost its color entirely, while liquid within gained its own thickening into a red wad. It rolled into a glass container as another began to form behind it. Another, then another, then another. Soon, the case was full. Within minutes, other 3 were as well. Mr. Di Bartolo stepped back and nodded in approval. This ought to take edge off the goddamn cigarette tax, he mumbled, as he lifted the machine and began to haul it out front. Come on, honey. Mommy needs to go in and out. We have a lot of stops to make before we can go home, and we only have about an hour.
Oh, Mom.
The boy's mother looked at the machine, then at her boy, across a little stop and go and back again. Okay. Here's a quarter. Mommy's gonna go run over and grab what she needs, then we can go. You stay right here by the machine and don't go anywhere, okay? Just gonna be a second.
Okay,
The little boy said, snatching up the quarter. As his mom hurried over what she needed, he excitedly shoved the quarter into the sticky's machine. He cranked it, and a little clear plastic bubble rolled out. He popped it open as quickly as he could, and an ear-to-ear grin immediately stretched across his face. Inside was a wad of blood-red slime. He poked his fingers inside and plucked out a horrible little figure, a skeletal little monster in a pastiche of scary pose, with a big, swollen, bumpy head and a bug-eyed, snaggle-toothed face. It looked like its guts were about to burst out. It was hideous.
awesome.
He popped it back into its plastic bubble and slid it into his jacket pocket. With a little luck, maybe he could get another quarter from his mom. He was going to spend every quarter he could to get his hands on at this machine. Mr. Di Bartolo smiled. He hoped the power ponies would do as well. Was that a reference to My Little Pony magic? Like, franchise magic? Alright. Dear Jeff, this is the door behind me. Dear Jeff, I cannot think of any way to start this letter other than with a warning. Do not, under any circumstances, open the new door. Paint over and replaster it. If that doesn't work for any reason, then seal off the room or just abandon this property. Although I understand that's probably not feasible. I have left my share of the rent in an envelope at the top of the TV. I will not be returning. Sorry to leave you like this, buddy, but I should explain, but my hand is shaking. This may take a while. I've never told any of my friends about this before. I never even told Harriet. Why would I? It never seemed to be that big of an issue, like if you had a particularly bad peanut allergy. Why would you tell someone unless they offered you a PBJ? I certainly never imagined it would come to this. I can only imagine that your reaction to my confession will be the same as that of my parents when, at a very early age, I called them to my room after suffering a nightmare, the specifics of which I never have been able to recall. I asked them who it was that would come knocking at my door whenever I was afraid. Of course, I had no idea what I was talking about, which confused me. How could they not know about my door? Was I strange? Was I the only one that heard the scrabbling of hands pressed against my door whenever dread began to build within me? Was I the only person who, when she received a shock, the rapid beating of her heart would be punctuated by the sound of heavy fists and the splintering of wood? I clearly remember them asking me why that was my door so pristine, if someone had been pounding so hard at it to make it splinter. My mother turned my bedroom light on, closed my bedroom door, and my father began to rap on it, running his hands across the varnished white wood. The door, of course, was unscratched and perfectly unmolested, save for a small dent just above my Ninja Turtles poster, and that, as far as I know, had always been there. I was incredulous. How could they not understand that the door I was speaking of was not the door to my bedroom? It was my door, the door behind me, the door that had that had always been behind me since the day I was born. The one that not even I could see, was always just behind my back, following me wherever I went and turning as I turned. They asked me how I knew it was there, and I told them that I just knew. I'd always known. If I concentrated hard enough, I could feel its smooth paneling behind me, its large cold doorknob. I'd always assumed that everyone had a private door, since they just sort of followed you around, invisible and barely tangible. It was just some grown-up thing that we never spoke of. Perhaps when you grew up, you got to enter it. Perhaps it was the door to heaven from when you died. My parents dismissed this as part of my nightmare, and I never brought it up again, suddenly aware that I might just be imagining it. Until very recently, the possibility that I might just be slightly mad has always appealed to me. Since then, I had never really believed in the supernatural, religion, mind readers, tarot. Everything is just a scam or a mental crutch to those afraid to live their lives without a moral guide or excuse for laziness. However, the door has always been there behind, and on the off chance that I might not actually be insane, I've gone to aura readers, psychics, and all manner of bizarre shamans in every corner of the world that I've ever set foot on, and no matter how terrifically accurate their observations and predictions were, none of them ever mentioned the door. I never brought it up, and neither did they. I had experimented a few times with the thing, backing into walls to see if it would stick there, creating a physical portal with which I could finally step through. Also, on certain occasions, I tried to open the damn thing. The knob would turn freely and the door would slide open with ease, but naturally, as it was stuck so close behind me, the door would only open a fraction of an inch before getting obstructed by my own body. Opening the door never caused any major revelations other than a slight chilly breeze and a rare, distant sound of waves lapping or some kind of bird song I could never identify. Something of note, however, is that by opening the door near a thermostat, I would almost certainly cause the temperature nearby to drop anything between 3 and 12 degrees. Doing it with a group of people around often resulted in them displaying signs of being chilled by some unknown cold. Proof of my claims? Possibly, but I never attempted to show my finding to anyone. For all I know, I could show them my notebooks, and it would turn out that I had just been drawing graphic stick figure rape scenes all these years, or something equally disturbing. I decided that perhaps I should follow this gnawing doubt, considering the imagined outcomes of whether or not I had believed or was ousted a psychopath were equally unpleasant in their ramifications. No matter. Real or not, the chill of the ocean door was pretty comforting during summer heat waves. My college dorm was always a popular spot around July, although we came to the conclusion that no matter how many times I changed apartments, I think it was 4 in total, that I'd always managed to move into the shady side of the dorms. By now, Jeff, I assume you have spotted it between the bookshelf and the TV, behind the red leather love seat. You're probably tempted to go back, to go have a look so that you could get to the bottom of this, to file your report to the police or maybe the detective you could hire to try and track me down. But I certainly hope it doesn't come to that. I implore you to finish this letter before you jump to any decision, and remember what I asked my parents that night when I was a child. I asked them who, when I was afraid, who was it that would come knocking at my door? Well, perhaps knocking is too childish a term to use now. You see, ever since I was a child, the thing I've been most afraid of, to paraphrase Teddy Roosevelt, is fear itself. Upon feeling the slightest twinge of angst, I would hear something from the door behind me. The stress of a school test in the morning that I hadn't studied for, or the venomous stares of girls would summon. Perhaps the sound of a single sharp nail tracing across the wood on the other side of my door. One time when I was 19, I was working in a shoe store near my house. After a long series of snide exchanges and low-grade threats with coworker, I plucked a large fat slug from the pavement on a particularly rainy morning and left it to drown in his morning coffee. A teenage prank, nothing more, but as he took his first sip of coffee at the Trills while I was opening up shop, I knew when he saw what happened he would know it was me and I'd be fired. I'd have to move back in with my parents and lose my rather high-maintenance boyfriend due to the lack of funds. A cold sweat took me and a deep fear welled up in the pit of my stomach, giving life to my guts as they seemed to squirm around me. The door behind me began to creak and groan, and I could hear the myriad of fingers and hands pushing and scraping against it, thumping with feeble palms and scraping with nails that sounded too sharp and too long to be allowed to be seen. My coworker took the cup to his lips and drank deeply. I could feel physical splinters of woods in my back. It was excruciating, but I maintained my poker face. I was used to hiding this sort of thing. After that, he sort of just downed the cup, throwing it in the trash without even looking under the plastic lid, none the wiser. The fear and pressure went away instantly. I spent the rest of the day walking around with a cool breeze on my back and the sound of creaking wood haunting me down every hallway. Checking in the mirror, I could see that my back had no marks from the splinters, and the next morning the door was as good as new. I once again dismissed it as my own faulty wiring. Now, I've already told you that I am a rational woman. I have never once believed, for much longer than a dark hour or two, that this door could be anything more than the product of a deformed, possibly damaged brain. Even so, even moments like the one at the shoe store, I would never dare open the door for fear of what may slip through the cracks. In my mind, at least, when I become afraid, there were things knocking at my door, and on a few occasions they very nearly came through. And if these creatures did exist, even only in my fervid imagination, what would happen if they did come through? Would I snap mentally, suffer a brain hemorrhage or heart attack, or drop dead? Would I be lost in some internal nightmare moment that my brain would cook up in the moment of death? Perhaps I would lash out in fear, becoming a danger to myself and others. If I was going to be responsible with this one life that I had been given, it was up to me to eliminate fear from my brain. It took years of psychological and philosophical training. Yoga, meditation, martial arts. I became a nurse. I worked with terminal patients. I spoke to them. I held their hands as they died. I had to realize that death is inevitable, that the only way to avoid bad things happening to me in life is to be logical, meticulous, and try my best to make one of every of my life's plans foolproof. Anything that happens after that would be beyond my control. I am a speck of ignorant nothing, adrift in an infinite sea of chaos. My life is as unimportant as fear is unnecessary. The lack of fear brought the hunger for adventure, for conquest. I quit nursing when I was 23, joined the Marines, and when before long did a tour of duty in Iraq. We caught the ass end of the conflict, but it still wasn't pretty. I faced death, injury, and a large period of near-fatal illness in the wake of an amateur dirty bombing, but I never once heard anything about my door. I shot up a few ranks, and by the time I got home, I was being offered the chance to train new recruits. I turned them down, and then told them about the door to make sure I was never going to be redrafted. It didn't take me long to tire of war. It was disgusting, boring, and pointless. Being part of a technologically superior invading force stationed in a country that was so broken it was so clearly not a real threat to home was sobering, to say the least. So there you have it, Jeff, the story of my time in Iraq. Since we won't be seeing each other again, I figured I'd give you what you always wanted to hear about. Told you it wasn't that interesting. You know the rest. The restaurant managing catastrophe, leaving me near homeless, with only you and Harriet left to keep me out of the gutter. For that, I'll always be grateful. Suppose now I should explain the blood on the kitchen floor, and the living room walls, and the bathroom ceiling, and on the staircase leading in trails up to the bedrooms, which I don't advise you walk into anytime soon, or at all. Leave that to the police. You're damn lucky you took tonight off, man. Should have joined you, but the hurricane was coming, and if we didn't storm-proof the whole damn house, we would have lost our investment. I must admit I was pretty pissed at you for leaving us to go visit your sister. The flood's about to start and all hands needed on deck, but that's not really important anymore. I was working on fixing up the cracks in the in-suite's bedroom window frame, and Harriet was preparing a quick dinner and a fire to keep us warm. We'd been working for 8 hours straight. The wind was howling outside, and the house was freezing us to the bone. I was tired, and the night was harsh, but I was content. Until I heard the only sound on earth that could have brought up the pounding fear that manifested behind me as a heavy fist on my long, undisturbed door. Harriet's scream. "I saw somebody in the window," she called up to me in a high, wavering voice. I told her I was coming, set down my tools, and dusted myself off. "He's back! He's knocking! Looks like he wants me to let him in." Then came the sound of glass shattering. Then she screamed. There were 4 guys. There had been 5, but I think they lost track of him in the storm. From what I could gather, our latest house was once the old haunt of this particular group of individuals. Apparently, just a few years ago, this neighborhood was even worse than it is now. To put it bluntly, the little fixer-upper we'd been preparing to flip was once these boys' favorite crack house. I'm not sure, how to be honest, what led them back here, and when they were so surprised to see us and why they were so surprised to see us fixing the place up. I think maybe one or more of them had recently been released from jail or on the run for somebody, or maybe they'd just been caught in the floods and forced to retreat to their nearest safe location. Maybe all three. They must have been really happy to come home to their little hovel all done up nice and homely, with a petite woman preparing food in a bathrobe across from a roaring fire. They, of course, were far less happy to find her bull of an ex-Marine wife bearing down on them and screaming bloody murder. With my training, it shouldn't have been much of a problem. None of them have come packing heat, but one of the scumbags did have a hefty claw hammer tucked away in his pocket. A couple of lucky whacks from the thing had me on the floor. I had to watch them tuck into Harriet's diner with their bare hands, listen to them joke about how nice the place looked as they stripped her and tossed her on the couch. I made threats and tried to get back to my feet, to do anything, but the fat one had his foot planted squarely between my shoulder blades and responded to any unruly behavior on my part with a stomp to the back and a perverted whisper of, "You're next." I couldn't control it. I was afraid. Too afraid. My life went nothing, but I couldn't bear to see something so horrific unfold right in front of me. They had Harriet on the couch, tormenting her, tormenting me. I could feel the splinters of the door on my back. The hands came, the scratching. One of the thugs, this little rat-faced bastard with patchy facial hair, couldn't have been more than 25 years old, pulled her towards him and spread her legs wide with such force that I heard something snap. She was crying hysterically, and he was just staring down at her. It was like he couldn't believe his luck. There was a massive groan of warping wood and a crack from behind me. The door was giving way, and much more. The others could hear it. It was so loud that it caused that fat motherfucker to jump back, away from me. That rat-faced asshole let go of Harriet and looked over at me. I took the opportunity to stand up, but I was unable to move. Pain was shooting through me and causing me to seize up. I was being impaled, shards of the broken door sinking deep into my flesh and bones. A blast of air, colder than that of the storm that had been leaking into the room through the broken window, hit us all. A high-pitched whine filled the room, and I could feel something moving inside me. My head was spinning, vision fading, sound disappearing. All I can really remember hearing was one of the thugs from the kitchen saying something like, "What did you do? He's bleeding everywhere!" And that was it. I'm trying hardest to recall it all, but I'm just getting flashes. The walls are different, covered in something moving. I can see the shadows of hands, flashing lights, blood. I can hear things, sounds like people screaming underwater, ripping, wet, crunching sounds. Something was watching me, judging me, waiting for some kind of reaction like it was a test. Exposed muscle, breaking bones, something collecting the eyes and the teeth, something shining in the darkness, pale as the moon. Not quite a face, but watching me, not quite hands, but reaching for me. An embrace? Look, as far as I know, I could have completely snapped, gone off the deep end. I'm a trained killer. There are many ways I could have killed them all and made it painful. But I can't find Harriet among the bodies. I can't contact her phone. Nobody has heard from her, and it's very possible that I'm totally insane, that I'm still there in the living room or somewhere else in the house, catatonic or worse. But all I know is that when I came to, I was surrounded by the dead with not a drop of blood on me. For the first time in my life, I couldn't feel the door. There was no more invisible door. There was nothing behind me but the wall. What there was a new door in the living room, between the bookshelves and the TV, behind the red leather love seat that you thought would be a nice touch to include with the place. If there's no door there, then call the police. I'm still here or out on the streets, and I've lost my mind. But if the door is there, if the door is in the living room that you've never seen standing as if it had been part of the house, then for the love of God, do not open it. Seal it off, seal off the damn room if you have to. Close off the house and leave it to stand in silence if you possibly can. I can't stop staring at the door. It's been behind me all my life, and now here it is in front of me. I can hear nothing from the other side. It looks plain as day. Could Harriet have gone beyond it? I hope the storm washes away this house and me with it. I'm going to go through the door. God help me. No, not you, Jeff. You're a good Jeff. Most Jeffs are good Jeffs.
My name is Jeff.